against Alec May. Jim Davis on Jeskai aggro, and he's against Obzon aggro from Alec May.
So this is a big tournament for Jim here with a pretty sizable lead in the Season 1 race for a slot to the Players' Championship. Jim flew down here to try to lock that up along players like Danny Jessup and Joe Lissette, who are trying to hunt him down. Jim had a great day one, 8-1 right now. You can see he's up a game in this matchup, and if he is able to put up a good performance here, something like a top 8, that should lock him for the Players' Championship.
So recapping the board here, Jim's up a game, but you can't say things are going too great for him. On Jim's side, he has 4 lands and a Seeker of the Way, and hand does have just drew a copy of Valorous Stance to go with a second Seeker. Stance has some pretty juicy targets, though. When you look at Alec May's side of the board, nothing in his hand, but he does have Anafenza the Foremost and Tassiger the Golden Fang in play. So larger creatures certainly looming on Alec's board.
So I'm a little late to the party here, but from where I'm sitting in Jim's position, casting the Seeker of the Way, using the Valorous Stance to take care of Tassiger, and getting into a holding pattern here where Alec probably can't attack immediately because if Jim draws a cell, that's a lot of lifelink on the way back. Seems like a good place to be.
Yeah, Jim down on life, but not by too much. He's at 10 out to Alec's 15. But it seems like you're right, that Tassiger, if Jim can't kill it, will do a ton of damage.
Yeah, there's no graveyard, so if Alex is able to find some high-impact cards immediately, they just get deployed. So given the fact that the board's in a bit of a holding state right now, I think it's very important for Jim to get Tassiger off the table.
And we see that Valorous Stance does take out the Tassiger. And Jim's last card is that Seeker of the Way. So you're right, despite the fact that Jim has a pair of 2/2s to Alec's 4/4, it does look, he can't really attack because, yeah, if Jim draws that spell, those 2 Seekers get lifelink, and then Alec doesn't really make any progress.
Now, if Alec draws anything at all that matters, a creature that can block or a spell of his own, then he can go on the offensive, and you see that right here.
Yeah, so Anafenza swings in Jim down to 5, I believe. Does have to watch out, these Obzon aggro creatures hit so hard.
Yeah, they are 3/3s and 4/4s, and they're all big.
And yeah, Burmaz is the king of Oreskos. That's the draw for May. Back over to Jim. His last card is a fetch land, so that's not any help. He does want a spell, but it's going to be Battlefield Forge. Yeah, one thing I like about the strength of this Jeskai deck is, or rather this Obzon deck, is it gives your opponent so little time to draw their answers.
And in that spot, if Jim draws something like Stoke the Flames or Valorous Stance, it's a huge swing. He might even arguably be winning the game at that point, but he missed on his draw step, and now he's in chump block mode.
Yeah, great attack by Alec. He swings the Anafenza and the Burmaz. Yeah, Jim actually, because he's at 5, cannot double block the Burmaz because it will let 5 through thanks to this cat token. So Jim with no really profitable blocks here.
Yep.
Suppose Alec, the concern from Alec is that if Jim had a burn spell of some sort, Jim could make some pretty excellent blocks here.
Well, Jim would have just used the burn spell to, I guess if it's something like Lightning Strike or Wild Slash, he wouldn't have been able to do anything significant with it last turn. So I suppose there's some risk here, but I think Alec just has to attack. The attack's too good, even if Jim drew something like Lightning Strike or Wild Slash, so you just have to do it.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's better to not play around the answer situations. You see Jim chumping 1 Seeker to the Anafenza, taking the other to take out the cat token, then taking 3 off Burmaz. Jim drops down to 2, draws another copy of Seeker of the Way. A lot of Seekers, but nothing that they can find right now in terms of a spell. They're just 2/2s, and Jim looks like he's on the losing side of this race.
Yeah, he does get an opportunity to double chump block again, but this is only a matter of time.
He passes. Yeah, this time he's going to have to chump both the large creatures and let the cat warrior through.
This is the first time I've seen the Anafenza Burmaz non-bow, which is pretty charming.
Anafenza, it takes a surprising amount of work for her to get a counter onto another creature.
Yeah.
A swing in Jim. He'll go to 1 end. We are on to game 3 between the 2.
So there's a very subtle thing that just happened there, with Jim slowly peeling back his card there on the last turn. Because that's a spot where, if Jim draws End Hostilities, he's back in the game the way the board looks.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Jim does not have End Hostilities in his list.
Correct.
But that little slow draw there at the end may get into Alec's head that that's a card he has to play around for game 3.
Yeah, and if you weren't following us yesterday, something that Jim Davis and Anthony Lowry actually are doing with their Jeskai decks is a lot of times you see Jeskai players side into a more controlling package. Things like Disdainful Strokes, Negates, and Hostilities, as you mentioned. Now, they're actually on much more of a red-white deck with just a very small touch on blue. Now, that means you could play cards like End Hostilities, but they don't. Instead, they still maintain a lot more of an aggressive posture in all their matchups.
Right, and I think that slow draw from Jim there when he's drawing dead, that's all about getting into Alec's head that End Hostilities is in his deck. That's all that's about.
Yeah, and you see players re-sideboarding here as we go to game 3. We're going to look at Jim's sideboard, the cards that he can use here. We certainly saw him use a copy of Valorous Stance that last game. That's not surprising at all. Glare of Heresy was in his graveyard as well. But a lot of his other answers, I'm not sure how much he actually has in this matchup. Cards like Sarkhan, Bramaz, even Disdainful Stroke don't seem to have too much mileage here.
Yeah, the Valor Stance and Glare of Heresy are very solid against Obs on aggro, and I think that Jim is just trying to have a game plan of, my mana base is more solid than yours, you're going to take more damage, your removal's not quite as efficient, and I can beat you before you do anything too powerful. He doesn't have any trumps in the matchup, no haymakers, but he's just trying to play a leaner, more efficient game.
Yeah, you see Alec in his list from Obs on aggro, one of the developments that really has helped push the deck again, 4 copies of Warden of the First Tree.
Yes. His sideboard, 4 copies of Thoughtseize, 3 Drown in Sorrow, 2 Back to Nature, 2 Glare of Heresy, 2 Elspeth Sun's Champion, 2 copies of Nissa. I think that Glare of Heresy is solid in the matchup. I think if he knows exactly what's in Jim's list, Drown in Sorrow is pretty good as well. Jim's on a lot of 2/2s, though Alec may not be totally certain what Jim's exact configuration is, so maybe it comes in, maybe it doesn't. And if Alec wants to go big, I think the 2 Elspeths are a fine way to try to win the game against Jim, but I would not want to go that big in the matchup.
Yeah, Jim did have multiple copies of Seeker of the Way, so maybe Alec will be tempted to bring in Drown in Sorrow. Then again, it's not always possible to Drown in Sorrow a Seeker of the Way.
Right, and it depends on what creatures he saw, too, because some builds of Jeskai aggro are playing threats with, like, Bramaz. Even Ash Cloud Phoenix is pretty durable against Drown in Sorrow, so depending on exactly what Alec has seen thus far, that's going to dictate whether or not he wants to bring in his copies of Drown in Sorrow.
Now, one thing I was asking, we saw with Jeskai aggro, is how do we feel about cards like Outpost Siege in this matchup? It's one of the cards that's really helped these red-white and Jeskai aggro decks along, but in a matchup which is so racing, has so many racing elements like this, is it a card that Jim has time for?
I like it in the post-board games, because typically what happens in this kind of matchup is both decks slow down and bring in more removal, and Outpost Siege can be pretty powerful there. I think game 1, it's not going to be very good, but games 2 and 3, you know, Jim's bringing in more copies of Valorous Stance and Glare of Heresy. Alec could be sideboarding anything, is bringing in Glare of Heresy and Drown in Sorrows of his own. So Outpost Siege makes a lot more sense in those kind of games. It's going to be slower. You're going to have time to get it online.
Yeah, absolutely. Does make sense. The more Jim starts to look like a control deck, the more he seems to be interested in a card like Outpost Siege.
And the same is true on Alec's side, too. The more that Alec looks like a control deck,
the more Jim wants Outpost Siege.
Exactly.
Yeah, game 1 when they're both aggro, it can be slow.
Yeah. And Outpost Siege has been, it has not been great on camera so far this weekend because we've seen a lot of Devotion matchups where there just is not time for that kind of effect. Outpost Siege is so powerful in the normal games. You know, it's your Jeskai deck against their Obzon deck or your red-white deck against their Sultai deck, and Outpost Siege looks so good in those games. But so far in camera, we've seen a lot of Green Devotion, and in those kind of games, it just doesn't feel like the red decks have enough time to deploy Outpost Siege and get much out of it. The best moments for Outpost Siege in those matchups have, in fact, been when it's been set on dragons and someone's just made combat more prohibitive for their opponent.
Yeah. Going to the Obzon deck, I'm looking at the creature base for it. Want to walk through the choices that Alec has made. He has the standby creatures of Anafenza, Rakshasa Death Dealer, Fleecemane Lion, Warden of the First Tree. Only playing a couple Bramaz, does have 2 Wingmate Rock, and then just 1 copy of Tassiger.
So this is a little bit of a bigger build than the one that Andrew Boswell used to top 8 in Miami last week. There was a copy of the list. I unfortunately forget the pilot, but there was a copy of the list that was playing a couple copies of Wingmate Rock in the main. It was going a little bit bigger. But this is a much higher end build than the one that Boswell was playing, where the top of his curve was Siege Rhino, and I guess if you count Tassiger.
Yeah, and even though he's a 1-drop, Warden of the First Tree is actually a higher curve card.
Well, it gives you some staying power. I think it's appropriate both in builds like this and the lower end build that Boswell's playing. Because if you think the game's going to be short, well, it's just another 1-mana play that becomes a 3/3 pretty easily. And if you're trying to mess around with things like Wingmate Rock and Elspeth on the board, you're already trying to play this longer game. 1 game out of X, you're going to end up going all the way to the top with Warden.
All right, well, we are underway. Game 3, Jim Davis versus Alec May. Both players at 8-1. So you're going to start off with a Battlefield Forge on Jim's side, Temple of Silence on Alec's. As they set up. Mantis Rider hanging out in Jim's hand. It may be his first creatures. His draw there was Mystic Monastery.
That's a good draw. If Jim was not deploying the Flooded Strand, it meant that he was hoping to draw a land. Now he's got his mana fixed and access to Mantis Rider here on turn number 3. very good on the play, especially if Alec is on one of those tap land type of draws.
Yeah, well, Alec has to make some decisions here. I believe he has 4 lands in play, but only one of them comes into play untapped. This is often one of the really big resource situations of Abzan aggro. You have to decide which creature you need to play on curve and when you can take a break. He's going to make a turn 2 Fleece Main line, cashing in his Windswept Heath. His other 2 lands do come into play tapped, so this will have some opportunity cost, and that his plays on the next turn may or may not come into play untapped.
Although Temple of Silence into Forest is a nice setup for Alec because it allows him to cast Fleece Main Lion and Rakshot's Death Dealer, meaning that if he needs to play comes into play tap lands, he can do that and still deploy his 2s.
The cat will be the play as the 3/3. Jim, because he had that tap land, I believe he did have Lightning Strike available.
Yeah, Jim really wanted to play Mantis Rider on turn 3, so he had to give up something. Either
Right.
access to Lightning Strike on the end step of Alec's second turn, or Mantis Rider on turn number 3.
We'll see now. Now he does have the access to both plays. See which one he decides to go with. It's pretty hard to pass up on Mantis Rider.
Yeah, it's more mana efficient now. It's damage this turn. It puts Alec on pressure to have a removal spell, and Alec might have to spend his third turn killing the Mantis Rider in lieu of playing his own threat because Mantis Rider represents so much damage. And then at that point, Jim can untap, Lightning Strike the Fleece Main Lion if he so desires, and you have a neutral board. So for a variety of reasons, I like just casting the Mantis Rider this turn.
Yeah, on the Abzan side, you have to watch out on races here because only one of the 2 deck plays red cards. So there's a lot more reach on Jim's side, whereas Alec needs to be ahead on the board. Jim can be even or behind and still win games.
A lot more haste, too. The burn spells you mentioned sort of represent haste threats. Mantis Rider does as well. The only analog to that in Alec's deck is Siege Rhino.
Jim with that turn, with that next land, it's Flooded Strand. Maybe his only other land right now. I believe it is. You see a lot of cards: Stoke the Flames, 2 Rabble Masters, a Mantis Rider, and a Lightning Strike.
Yeah. And you see the Rabble Master. There is an argument for playing the Rabble Master this turn because it makes, if Jim decides he wants to Stoke next turn, it makes that slightly more efficient. But I feel like Mantis Rider is so good right now that that's just what Jim's going to do.
And it is what Jim does. Has to take 2 damage to do it, 1 for the fetch land, 1 for the pain land, but Mantis Rider will come across for 3. Alec is down to 16, Jim at 18. You go over back to Alec. See, his draw for the turn was Hero's Downfall. That stands to be pretty good against the Mantis Rider. Actually does have 1 more coming to play tapped land, but it'll cost him. It's Mana Confluence. Plays that, downfalls the Mantis Rider. Alec goes to 15 to cast the downfall, but Jim goes to 15 on the hit, and both players are currently even as we pass back to Jim.
Well, that's 2 damage off of Alec's lands thus far, Windswept Heath and Mana Confluence, and likely to be more because the land is Mana Confluence. And those little chip shots here, they all add up against a deck like Jim. And now there's an opening for Rabble Master. This is another free point of damage. It requires Alec to respond again on his turn. And you can see Jim's plan for staying more aggressive here is in part because Alec's lands are just going to add up over the course of time. And you can pair those with Stoke the Flames and cheap removal spells to beat a objectively more powerful deck just because all these little points of damage add up.
Yeah, and Jim's taking equal amounts of damage off his own lands, but that really doesn't seem to be as important here.
Jim is better suited to play this sort of game, and he's on the play this game. So that adds up to, yes, it's the same amount of damage roughly, but way better for Jim than for Alec.
All right, Fleece Main Lion swings in. Alec plays a Temple and then follows up with a Bramaz. So Alec at 14, now 13 off the Bramaz. Jim is at 12 off the hit from Fleece Main Lion. So the life total is very close here.
And if this is the type of turn where if Jim has Stoke the Flames, all hell can break loose because Alec's just going to be way behind on the board, take a lot of damage this turn, still be on Mana Confluence for a source of mana, and not really have Jim close to lethal on the other side of the table.
Jim does have Stoke Flames, but let me tell you about the card he drew, which is a lot better in this situation. He drew a copy of Valorous Stance.
Well, I think he also has another Rabble Master in his hand, so he has a lot of paths this turn.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of damage coming across on Alec. Just Lightning Strike plus Valorous Stance for Jim. Could be second Rabble Master. Could just be Stoke the Flames and attack.
It's an embarrassment of riches over in Jim's hand right now. This is it's only an option of how bad does he want to make this for Alec. What is he trying to play around at this point? And, you know, has he seen Drown in Sorrow is another question, too. Because if he's seen Drown in Sorrow or he suspects that Alec might have it, you know, that makes it slightly riskier to go with something like
Second Rabble Master.
Second Rabble Master and
yeah.
Soak. If he has Lightning Strike, the most conservative route is just Valorous Dance Shipper Maz, Lightning Strike your Fleece Main line, hit you for a bunch of damage and keep Stoke in my hand, and the other Rabble Master.
Yeah, see, Alec with his hand is a Death Dealer, lands, and a Tassiger.
So this is the more conservative line of play.
Yep, Valor Stance takes care of Bramaz. Here comes the attack from the Goblin tokens. It's 4 from the Rabble Master and 2 from the tokens. That's a swing of 6. Alex will go down to 7. And Jim with Lightning Strike and Stoke the Flames in hand, that does add to 7. So there's not, I don't even think he kills the Fleeceman line here. He's just going to sit back and perhaps kill Alec this turn.
Yep. It's one of those deals where, you know, if Alec produces another blocker, the Lightning Strike's more efficient going at the face. And if in the off chance Alec spends his turn trying to go monsters with Fleece Main Lion, then it's awesome for you to have the Lightning Strike left over.
Right, I mean, well, this is lethal unless Alec has a Siege Rhino, right?
Yes.
And even with a Siege Rhino, Alec would take a damage to cast it, so he'd only go to 9. Jim could use the burn spells, and I believe with the Goblin token still has a lethal attack.
Yeah, and the Siege Rhino would likely just have to block the Rabble Master in the best case scenario, so it's not even the end of the world. It would be a trade at best.
Well, yeah, I think Alec would be dead to it. The Goblins would get across. So you see there, Anafenza the play for Alec. Jim is going to cast Lightning Strike. He points that one upstairs. Alec's goes from 7 to 4, and if you're not killing the Fleece Main Line, then that's a real bad sign. Jim draws his turn. He's going to show the land and has Stoke the Flames in hand. Going to just be certain here. Make sure he's playing around the right cards. Plays Rabble Master. That's second Rabble Master. That's going to be 2 Goblin tokens. And here's going to be Stoke the Flames for lethal. And there you have it. Jim Davis, 2 games to 1, defeats Alec May. He moves to 9-1 and into currently in the top 8 of the standings.
And Jim there, without some sort of fancy transformation, go big, control deck type of sideboard here, basically just stayed true to his game 1 plan, brought in a couple more precise removal spells in Valorous Dance and Glare of Heresy, and that was a winning recipe. I like that kind of game plan from Jeskai Aggro. Again, in this matchup at least, a lot more than trying to go big to things like End Hostilities and Elspeth, and Jim was able to execute his conventional game plan very well as a result.
Yeah, well played for Jim Davis. For Alec May, he's at 8-2. Remember, that's still very live. These players wanting to be in the top 8 at the end of the day. Both were in the top 8 currently going into this round. So Alec will fall down, but has plenty of chances to recover.
And just a very well played game 3 there from Jim. A lot of different options, and I think that he picked lines of play that allowed him to maximize his opportunities to get in damage while not leaving himself overly exposed to something like Drown in Sorrow. So just very, very solid game 3 there from Jim, both in the way that he sideboarded, the way he constructed his deck, and then the way he executed his game plan.